We're ready?
You ready? Good morning. The Finance Committee meeting is commencing at, my time is 10:36 on Wednesday, September 21st. All members are present, that being Alderwoman Finlayson to my right and Alderwoman O'Neill to my left. At this time, can I entertain a motion on the agenda?
Madam Chair, I'd like to move O2722 under ordinances up on the agenda to be the first one that we address today.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, next on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from September 7th, 2022. Can I entertain a motion for approval of those minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second?
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're going to go right into ordinances before us. The first one being moved up now is O27-22, Public Services, Water Service Billing, waiving late penalties for the purpose of allowing the Finance Director to waive certain late utility penalties and generally regarding City of Annapolis utility fees. I'd ask the sponsor, Alderwoman Finlayson, to brief us on the objective of this legislation and what it will do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This legislation is in response to citizen concerns about issues with their water bill. Because of COVID, things were delayed, things were lost in the mail, I hate to say. And so there have been any number of times when residents have asked for a waiver. And our code currently does not allow for any waivers, no matter how justified their requests might be. And so in speaking with our finance director, she expressed a need to have that ability to waive a fee. And I'll ask Ms. Dickinson to speak more specifically to this, if I might.
Yes, and we get this request not infrequently from citizens that are attempting to pay their utility bills. They miss for any number of circumstances, did not see, mailed something, or didn't get there in the mail. The mail has been very slow since the pandemic. We still have, it was very bad for a while. It's still sketchy in some instances. So there are occasions where people say it was delivered to the wrong address, I didn't see it, whatever the reason is. I've had requests from the citizens themselves and through the council members. Most of you have gotten requests from your constituents to try to get the fee waived, and the code does not authorize the finance director to waive the late fee. It requires a late fee if things are not paid on time. We have extended the time frame in which we apply the late fees by a couple days, so that we're kind of being lenient there. But once the fees are applied, I don't have the authority to waive them. I do not want to have to determine whether somebody's story is valid or this reason is valid and that reason is not valid. So I would like the authority to waive on occasion, not unlimited authority, which is why I asked when Alderwoman Finlayson asked about the legislation, I wanted it just a periodic waiver available to those who ask for it.
And Madam Chair, I absolutely support the finance director, and this is just one more tool in her toolbox to help us. So
Yes,
thank
unless
you.
further
I
discussion.
have two questions. One question I have is, I believe that we discussed you have the ability to keep track so that if Mrs. Smith has come with you for the last 6 months, every single month for a waiver. That's tracked.
Yes, so we send the utility, this is for utility charges that comes out quarterly. So there's 4 invoices a year to be paid. And this legislation allows one waiver in a 1-year period. And we have notes, and any waiver request will be compared against the notes in the system for the previous year to determine if this person has been given a waiver in a previous quarter.
And my second question for you is, if this were to pass through the council, would there be any opportunity for retroactive waiving of fees?
Not unless you provide it in the legislation. I would not be able to apply it retroactively, and that's a kind of legal question, as well as the effective date of the law, and what kind of authority those retroactive provisions would allow.
Okay, thank you.
My only question is, are you comfortable with the word discretion, since it would be your discretion?
So I will tell you, our policy will be, if it's requested, we will grant it. Like I said, I don't want to be the determiner of whether or not somebody's got a valid story or an invalid story, and determining whether somebody's telling the truth or they're not telling the truth. So we will apply it the way it's written, allow a waiver of penalties once every year.
And I absolutely would trust the discretion of the finance.
So I'm not sure how much discretion there is in that policy, but again, I can't have the cashiers and the people answering the phone there trying to determine whether they think somebody's got a valid reason.
Right, understood. Well, I think I'm sorry, Alderman Stottlemyre is here. Do you have a question?
More a comment on why this is so essential. I remember in kind of the heart of the pandemic, in the early winter of 2020, January, February, March, I was getting outreach from my constituents about water bill problems due to the budget cuts to the Postal Service. And I still get occasional ones here and there from the sketchiness from it. And one of the things that most frequently comes up is, I shouldn't have to pay a late fee because the post office delivered this when it was due, and it's due tomorrow. And they just delivered it today. So this is a very essential bill to give our finance team the flexibility to accommodate human conditions right now.
And Director Dickinson, if you or your staff have any questions on the particular request, you can contact the respective alderperson. You will do that if there's any confusion.
On the waiver applying the
Yeah,
policy?
yeah, thank you.
Yes, they're welcome to contact you at any time, or Hillary,
Mm-hmm.
to talk about the issues they have to do with the ordinance, but it's as a policy.
As a policy, if you simply allow the one quarter a year waiver, then it's not difficult to determine. We internally have to determine where that window is. Here's the beginning of the year, here's the end of the year, one time in that 1 year.
Okay. Well, at this time, I'll entertain a motion for a favorable recommendation of this ordinance.
Madam Chair, I'll move that we give O2722 a favorable recommendation.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Let it be noted that I think it has unanimous support from the council. All right, so next we're going to address O25-22, Revenue and Finance, Purchasing and Procurement, Prevailing Wage and Local Hiring for the purpose of establishing prevailing wage and local hiring provisions applicable to specific types of capital improvement contracts, et cetera, et cetera. We have the sponsor here, Alderman Stottlemyre, and the way I want to manage this discussion is I'd like first for Alderman Stottlemyre to say what is the objective of this legislation, what is the problem he's trying to address, and being the Finance Committee, what are the fiscal, if he knows of the fiscal impact of what this legislation will do based on actual data. Then that will be followed by you gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here, coming to the table. I understand, and you'll each speak for 2 minutes on this legislation. I think we'll have the questions. Would you want to have the questions after each individual or after the panel in its entirety speaks? Yeah,
I would prefer after each.
Yeah.
What did you say?
Yeah, our brain doesn't, we can't remember that long. So yeah, after each individual speaks, my colleagues will have some questions. At the end, if we have questions, we would ask that the Director of Department of Public Works is here, David Jarrell. He administers the capital projects. So we would like him to address the current situation and what this proposed ordinance would change, if that's okay. And also the same question for Director Dickinson. What is the, again, keeping it in the guardrails of finance, what is the financial implication of this bill? So with that, I'd ask Alderman Schottlemeyer to give us a synopsis of what the bill does specifically and what it will resolve or move forward doing for the benefit of the city.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I come forward today with a simple common sense bill, one that will guarantee that the people who build our city's infrastructure will get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Prevailing wage legislation that I put forward is heavily modeled after what Anne Arundel County passed about 3 years ago. The issue that they were bringing forward was that a lot of the construction projects that were brought forward, one, were given to contractors not close by to our area. So they brought in a local hiring provision. So instead of city or county infrastructure dollars getting sent out of state to people from Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, which used to be the norm, it would stay in Anne Arundel County. Now, the city of Annapolis does not currently have a local hiring provision for our construction projects. And so what we do see is when we spend city dollars on infrastructure projects, and we have a lot of infrastructure projects coming up, that we would be having best efforts to hire locally. And this is going to help give our local residents for both the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, because the city itself doesn't have the population to do all entirely within our borders for hiring process. It would make sure that money that is spent on our public projects would stay in our local economy. The folks who work here would be able to eat here, would be able to use our services and keep our local economy thriving. The other thing that Prevailing Wage strongly addresses is inequalities in the construction industry itself. Mr. Jones, who will be part of my panel here during our meeting on Monday, shared the information that Prevailing Wage actually cuts down on pay disparities between white workers and minority workers. And with that information, we can guarantee that when we have public money going into projects, we are doing it with an equity lens. And then there's the final issue of Prevailing Wage brings on a better class of worker. Yes, it is an investment. I understand we need to put investment in, but you get a better product from the longer hours that they work to train in order to get certified. And that means that we are going to get something that is built correctly, that we don't have to turn around and immediately do maintenance work upon it. A good example that I like to point to is back when I used to work maintenance and groundskeeping, I'd buy a pair of Walmart boots for about $75, and after 3 months, they'd fall apart. I'd have to buy another pair of Walmart boots for $75, 3 months, they'd fall apart, until I finally got what I paid for, invested $250 in a pair of Red Wing boots when I was 17, Red Wing, made in America, union made. And because I am first and foremost a showman, these have lasted me over 10 years. That investment in a union-made, well-crafted product has let me pay less money overall. It is because of this that I think investing in early with our massive infrastructure projects by guaranteeing a prevailing wage and a better class of worker, we will be saving money in the long term. And members of my panel will come forward with some examples of a state that got rid of its prevailing wage and ended up with those very problems.
Alderman Schottlemeyer, are you aware of the percentage of projects currently or the volume break of our projects in our capital improvements budget that already will have prevailing wage?
What is coming forward with all these projects that will be, I know the projects that we have that will be impacted by this. I know the big project with City Dock, because of the federal funding and state funding, will be paying prevailing wages. But in the staff report put forward by Mr. Gerald, some of the projects that we will get that would end up expanding into this would include the Burtis House, the Cars Beach development, City Dock, which I already covered, Hawkins Cove, the Stanton Center, Truxton Park, Cheston Avenue, the West-East Bikeway, and the Department of Transportation roof replacement. So 9 projects right now would be positively impacted by this.
Do you know approximately in this area the number of construction employees that are represented by unions?
I do not know that off the top of my head, but I believe the members of my panel definitely have that information.
Okay. Before we continue with the panel, colleagues and I were talking, and Assistant City Attorney Leonard, you may be able to assist us with this. Legally, we understand that the Finance Committee, under our purview, is procurement. And this legislation is totally new in the sense that there is no existing section, correct? And it would be inserted. And it would probably impact 6.04.070, which is who has the authority over public works contracts. Is that, so it isn't really standalone legislation. Could you just explain how legally this is framed in the code, how this will be included in the code?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I've had no involvement in this legislation.
Oh, you did not write it, or?
No, I did not write it, and I wasn't involved in it.
Okay, I apologize.
Ms. Reuter might have some idea, but you are correct that we don't have anything in the code similar to this now.
Okay.
So this would be a new sort of requirement in the code.
Okay.
If
May I follow up with Ms. Leonard? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Ms. Leonard, you do draft the negotiated agreements that we currently have.
I do. I am involved. So I understand the concept of the prevailing wage, and I'm aware of Anne Arundel County's law, and also the federal and the state laws, because depending on grant funding, we've had to flow those requirements down to contracts that we use. So I am aware of the general requirements.
So is there a way of knowing which of our contracts actually use prevailing wage and which do not?
You'd probably, and this might be a question for Director Gerald, but we'd probably have to evaluate each project as it comes up, because as I was skimming it, it looks like there's exceptions. So you'd have to look at the project and the procurement package and see if it falls within the exceptions or out for each one. I'm not sure. You could probably get a general idea of which ones this would apply to or not, but I still think it would have to be a case-by-case evaluation.
Thus, the need for additional staffing?
Possibly. I mean, especially depending on who you're putting this on. I know Central Purchasing currently has it under its responsibilities that they know if certain federal or state grants apply, they put it into the procurement package, but this might require additional coordination between that office and Public Works, because in the one hand you say, what we've been doing is, we have these grant funds, so it automatically goes in. That's a fairly simple analysis. This would be a much more complex analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Leonard, were you involved? Thank you. Were you involved in, we did revise our procurement code, I believe, under the
I wrote that, so yes, I was involved.
Okay. So in writing our procurement code, what are the overriding documents? I understand that Maryland has legislation addressing procurement. Keep the county, we're not under the county.
No, we're not under the county.
We're not under the county. We're under the state. So does our code right now reflect the state the state bill. I don't have it in front of me where we're not quite a right-to-work state. We're sort of this
I mean,
hybrid.
The state procurement laws, some apply to us and some don't. So, and some of them apply, for instance, if you're getting certain funding or not. So there are things within the construction realm related to, for instance, how much retainage you can hold. That is a state level decided thing that would override anything we would do. So you do have instances where the state law is coming into play. State law doesn't currently require this of us. That's why we would have to do, except for in, certain circumstances where their funding or other things trigger it. So that's why you would need this section if you wanted to apply more broadly to city
Yeah.
projects.
I think I'll have Director Jarrell explain, would it be now or later, what we have now. I don't think we're clear on what we have now. Director David Jarrell will be coming to the table. Sorry, gentlemen, we're just trying to get the framework of this legislation. It's quite extensive, so we want to know how it impacts and what problem we're trying to fix.
Good morning.
Hi.
David Gerald, Director of Public Works. So the prevailing wages apply to some federal projects because there's the Davis-Bacon Act that requires that federal projects have prevailing wages. Some state projects also have prevailing wages. So if we get money for projects from those two sources, and they qualify for those dollar amounts that those acts apply to, then we pay prevailing wages already. So that's a fairly small subset of our projects because most of them don't have prevailing wage requirements. The extra work that we're talking about here is not so much making the decision about whether it applies or not, but actually when you have prevailing wages, then you have to collect payrolls from the contractors, and you have to check that each employee is getting the amount of pay that they should be getting, the prevailing wage. So you collect all the invoices every pay period, and then you check to make sure that the employees are getting paid. So that's a workload that we don't currently do unless it's a Davis-Bacon or a state prevailing wage project. But that's mostly the additional work that's required. So that's why when the county passed this, they actually hired 3 additional people to do that additional work that's required.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Director Jarrell. Let me see if I understand what you're saying. We have a contractor, and with the prevailing wage requirement, then we actually collect the wages from the employer?
No, we collect the payrolls. So they keep track the payroll information that they prepare, and they have to submit that information of what they're paying each and every employee, so that we can check to make sure that they're being paid the appropriate amount, under the prevailing wage requirement. Does that make sense? So not the pay itself, but just the listing of what each employee gets paid.
So it's a paperwork.
It's paperwork
requirement.
It is.
Okay. And potentially that could be, and it's every single, for example, our garage right now, let's assume that they were under this requirement. All of the people who have worked on this garage would have to, the employers would have to submit paperwork on, in a list or whatever, of all of those employees on all phases of that project. And then what would we do with the information?
So then somebody from the city would have to check to make sure that each employee is getting paid the amount that they should be under the prevailing wage requirements.
So that means that person would actually have to go and speak to, or it's a written?
Well, usually they do audits from time to time to make sure that the payrolls are accurate. So they'll go out. Normally they just check the payroll, what I call the payroll, the listing of each employee and what they get paid. So it's a list of all the employees. Usually they also do audits, which means they take the payroll information, go talk to the employees and make sure that they're actually getting paid the amount that's being reported.
Okay,
But they don't do that every single pay for every single employee. They just do that sort of on a random basis to do spot checks.
Okay. Would we hear from the employees at any point in time?
Normally just when they do those audits. So the employees would have the opportunity to wage or to place a complaint if they felt like they weren't getting paid. They could do that, but otherwise it's just during that audit process that we talk to some of the employees.
Okay. Would that new auditor, in essence, be in the procurement department?
That's the concept, and that's how the county's doing it. It's in the procurement group.
Okay, so would that be something else we'd be adding to the plate of the procurement officer that we're trying to hire right now?
So yes, they have 2 out of 3 positions filled there, and they're very thinly staffed. This is obviously a combined effort between the purchasing side and Public Works. As you hear, they do it. I'm sorry. Is there something matter with the audio? Cindy looked like hers. No. Okay.
So everything's good?
Yeah, okay. So they're already doing some monitoring of contracts for the ones that have the federal dollars embedded or state dollars making that requirement. So I assume that's done by Public Works or some project manager on the Public Works side. So it's going to be a combined effort. But this bill has two things: requiring prevailing wages on these contracts, and then the monitoring and enforcement. And it's the monitoring and enforcement that's outlined in the bill is very, very comprehensive, in that it requires that every contract that's under these provisions have to submit their biweekly payroll data to whoever's doing the monitoring, and that person has to monitor that biweekly data and then follow up if there's some question, and there may be some work to go out to sites to verify what people are making. So when I was reading the legislation, that's where it kind of got unnerving, is all the steps that we would have to do. So it's a whole new procedure that's not currently being done by the purchasing staff. If you put that monitoring and enforcement into the Public Works cycle, like they do occasionally on the contracts that have the grant monies, that's going to be an extra burden on them as well. I mean, that's time that I don't think they have any manpower to handle that new requirement on all the contracts. So it would require extra manpower, whether it's in the purchasing side or somebody at Public Works involved in the contract reviews. That's up for decision. The reason it was drafted into the bill this way is because the county put it in their central services department, which is more comparable to our purchasing office.
May I follow up with Mr. Gerald? Who handles this now in your department?
So we have project managers assigned to each capital project. So it's our engineers, our engineer 2 positions that manage. For some of the bigger projects, we hire an owner's representative, a consulting firm, to help us manage those projects. So for instance, the water treatment plant, when we built that, we hired a company called Harry to help with the management of that. But it resides within the engineering group of Public Works.
So the responsibility, or you're dividing the labor to different project managers?
Right. So each project is assigned a specific engineer who manages the project.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Before, Alderman Schallemeyer, could we drill down into the present capital projects that we have, and which ones would require, even if it's a percentage? I see in the staff report you do list the ones that would require
Yeah, so there was a little bit, at least for me, there was a little bit of confusion about what projects
Yeah.
apply. In reading the legislation, it looked like, so normally capital projects are any project over $50,000 that includes acquisition, whether land or equipment or improvement of assets, which is construction. It appeared to me, so from that large group of 50,000 and above, it appeared that this applies only to projects of more than 100,000 if it's outside funded, or $5 million if it's city funded. So that excludes most of the strictly city funded projects, because we don't have very many that are city funded over $5 million. So this list I provide of 9 projects use that criteria for our approved CIP, and those are the projects that would apply. So again, over $100,000 if it's outside funded, or over $5 million if it's strictly city funding. And again, I'm not certain that that was the intent of this legislation, was to restrict it to just that subset of projects. But those are the projects that apply to that criteria.
Okay. So if a project receives FEMA funding, which for the stormwater projects, then prevailing wages.
It could be, yeah, it could be. So we always check. Not all federal projects have Davis-Bacon requirements.
Yeah.
But it could, because that's federal funding.
For the public knowledge, could you explain the two terms, Davis-Bacon versus prevailing wage?
Well, Davis-Bacon is just the federal Prevailing Wage Act. So it's been around for many, many years, and it requires that that contractors pay prevailing wages on contracts that it applies to.
So they're interchangeable.
They
is
are.
my point.
That's just the federal act that put that into place.
Okay. While we have you at the table, and again, I just want to stress that this is the Finance Committee. I don't want to get into the merits of comparing union to non-union and the quality level, et cetera, et cetera. That's not an issue in the Finance Committee. And besides, that's a little bit tricky with the Maryland state law right now. We do not want to disparage non-unions. So I just want to be clear that the framework of this discussion is the financial impact to the city. So using that framework, Director Jarrell, we recently bid out a project at Compromise Street, the Pump House project. We can be specific here. Which number was that?
Well, it's not one on here because these are ones that we would add it to the plans and specs for the project. So that one's already sort of grandfathered. We've already bid it out, and unfortunately we didn't successfully bid it out. But yeah, so we didn't have any of these provisions included in that project.
So that was not limited to prevailing wage?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
And how many bidders did you get on that
One.
project?
We got one bidder.
One bidder. Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions for Director Jarrell at this point?
Could I follow up on that point? Does it discourage contractors from bidding when they know that they're required to pay the prevailing wage?
That's not clear right now. So the county has had this in place for a little while. So I reached out to the Public Works Director there to ask him that question to see if they got more bidders, because this encourages more union contractors to bid. And I'll read what his response was. Or if it's less, because contractors don't want to have to deal with this. And Chris Phipps is the Director of Public Works for the county, and his response was, he's saying, so it's premature to detect any trends in bidding. In fact, we haven't yet opened any bids yet with the prevailing wage requirements. So since they haven't opened bids yet, they have no history at all. The first batch should be coming, but even still, it won't be enough volume to show a trend. And then he also said they also have the local preference, the local hiring preference, but again, it's too early to detect any impacts. So it will be some time before we know for sure. We would like to think that it would bring in more union contractors to bid on these, which would be a great benefit, but we're just not sure right now. We just don't have a track record.
So right now, we have a what you would call an open bid process.
And we will afterwards. So this doesn't say can be only union contractors or non-union. What this says is everybody has to pay the prevailing wages. So those are normally sort of union wages, but that doesn't exclude non-union contractors from bidding on these. They just have to pay those wages.
Right. I guess I should disclose, I don't think it stops me from voting for issuing a recommendation, but I did work in the construction industry for 30 years, and I started with a Turner Construction, Boston, union, top to bottom, down to stewards and every which way. And you know the culture up in New England with union. And then Turner realized the market was competitive, and they went open shop. So I've experienced both, and I just want you to be clear that I'm aware of both, and I don't have any strong opinions. With that, Alderman Sotomayor, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, good. Since we're both New Englanders, you want me to start dropping ass?
What's that?
You want me to start dropping my ass since we're both New England?
I still didn't hear
Never
you.
mind.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, hold on. No, let's go. David. David. Yeah. So my impression is two of the potential sticking points and concerns that are being shared on this front by city staff have been, one, the staff additions to monitor the programs. So Manager Gerald and I have had like 3 meetings on this bill. One as I was just starting to come up with it, one after we had gotten it like written out, and then one after its introduction. One of the things that was covered due to the low volume of projects that this would end up applying to, just those 9, is that outside consultants could be hired to prevent us from having to take on additional direct city staff that would cause us to have to pay increased benefits, et cetera. So we would still have compliance people for a lower cost to make sure that firms were in compliance with this. Is that a correct interpretation of our conversation?
I think all until the last 2 or 3 words that you said, the cost may not be less of hiring a consultant as compared to city staff, but certainly what we would need is capacity, not necessarily city employees, but we would need additional capacity to oversee the program. So it could be consultant. The consultants, consultants don't just operate independently, as we talked about. They have to be managed as well, but that would be an option, yes.
So that is a way for this to come in due to our lower volumes. And the second concern, and I did not have this information when we last had a meeting on this, I was given this last night, and when I get my hands on the actual studies, I will share them out with my colleagues. Mr. Jones also has some of this information as well from our panel, but there have actually been 5 peer-reviewed studies investigating 2,474 bids on schools, highways, and other municipal projects that have been done nationwide after prevailing wage standards were implemented, and it did not show reduced bidding due to these processes. So I understand the concern from that. Usually if you put too many restrictions or caveats on things don't happen. But what we are seeing here is that data does not exist in this case. It is showing no lack of competition. And so in that case, I would then go back into the investment is definitely worth it due to the higher quality of work that we get and the local hiring process and the local career building that we can get through our city and through our county.
I've kept the gentleman waiting long enough, so we thank you, Director Darrell, but stay here. If you could come up to the table and introduce yourself.
Yep, come on up, guys. Madam Chair, just a little background on my panel today. Joining us today are Tom Colleen from Smart Local 100. He is also the chair of the Anne Arundel COPE, Committee on Political Education. They're a local union advocacy group that has been heavily involved in Anne Arundel County politics. We have Michael Moneymaker, the new business manager for the Insulators Local 24 out in Laurel. They have a lot of members in this area. And then finally, Jermaine Jones from the Baltimore and DC Building and Construction Trades. Mr. Jones has been in front of municipal governments, county governments, and state governments, and he knows prevailing wage issues and back and forth. So I thank you for allowing me to bring this panel on.
Oh, absolutely.
So I guess I'll go first, and the risk of not being redundant. I mean, I can read through what I have, or we can have a conversation, whatever you.
First off, name and address, and is your mic on? Green light?
It is.
Okay, cool. Yeah, name and address, please.
My name is Tom Killeen, and I live at 8 Evergreen Trail, Severna Park, Maryland. I'm a business representative for Sheet Metal Workers, Local Union 100, and a legislative director. I represent roughly 100 union sheet metal workers that live in the Annapolis area, meaning has an Annapolis address. Whether or not it's in the city limits, I'm not quite sure about. But, you know, myself and our members, you know, we spend our money here. And as I said the other night, we have a office that's actually a corner of Conduit and Main Street.
Oh, could you explain to the public what a sheet metal worker is?
A sheet metal worker is a individual, male and female, that belongs to a union that serves a 5-year apprenticeship, and it takes a raw material, which is sheets of metal, and it turns it into a product, whether it's HVAC ductwork, metal panels for buildings, kitchen equipment, such as used in Chick-fil-A's, so on and so forth. So that's what metal roofing, we do that also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to point out a few things that were talked about earlier. Roughly on, I know the PLAs and prevailing wage are two different things, but they're similar. You know, PLAs are project labor agreements, and along with prevailing wage, roughly 50% of these projects are done 50-50 union and non-union. So it doesn't exclude anyone from bidding on it. What it does is the prevailing wage states that they get a certain pay for their labor of that day. The other thing I wanted to point out is there's no empirical data that says building a construction project under a prevailing wage costs the municipality, such as the city of Annapolis, any more money than not doing it on a prevailing wage. The money is usually spent here in the area, and you have usually a local hiring component to that. So with that said, the money's spent back in the area. The one thing I also would like to point out is in 2015, the governor of Indiana, his name was Mike Pence, he was our vice president for a short while, did away with prevailing wage in the state of Indiana. They went to a right-to-work state. And the study was done, it went into effect in 2015. A study was done in 2017 that actually proved by getting rid of prevailing wage, the construction costs went up. And these were due to the fact of cost overruns. They had shoddy contractors come in and bid work that now could bid work before they couldn't because they didn't meet the requirements. And the safety, injuries on the job went up, so on and so forth. They were not done on time. So what the study found was just because they thought they were going to a cheaper way of doing construction, it ended up actually costing the state of Indiana more money to do these projects. I don't have the study with me, but I can provide it later on so you can take a look at it. But it was a very short time period. It was a 2-year time period. But since then, other studies have come about and more or less said the same thing. So
what was the year of that, the time frame, what year?
it became right to work in 2015, and the study was done at the end of 2017. So it was about a 2-year study in the state of Indiana.
Thank you. Go ahead. Is that all right? No other questions?
Do you have any questions?
I tend to do that to people.
We can always come back to it
Yeah.
if we
Okay.
remember.
Yeah, so Indiana is still a right-to-work state?
That's correct.
Okay, so it wasn't,
I don't have a question.
okay. And for the public, I'll put it to you to explain what a right-to-work state is. I think we're throwing out terms that people don't know, so.
No.
Is somebody better to answer that question?
Well, right to work, I have there's plenty of answers for that. But essentially what it says is when your state becomes right to work or a municipality, it says that people that work especially in the construction industry, that if you have a union shop, the person working in that union shop does not have to pay union dues, but they have to be represented by the union. So the point of it is if the company or the company gets the job and they're a union contractor, and let's say their contract is up, we still have to represent the non-union people, the people that do not pay dues. We have to represent them just the same as a union worker. So you could have a shop that has both union and non-union people that work for that, that work for that company. So it's essentially what it says. If someone else would like to elaborate, I think it might.
Good morning. My name is Michael Moneymaker. I live 16 Ryan Frost Way, Baltimore County, 21221. I'm the business manager for the heat and frost insulators and allied workers, formerly known as the asbestos workers. Right to work is basically where, you have to represent everybody that is employed with that union contractor. Now, the thing what everybody misunderstands is the fact that we have to represent every worker no matter what. And in order to represent those workers, you normally need a union hall to keep the lights on, to pay the phone bills, to keep everything in order. And that's where members pay their union dues to keep their facility in order and intact. If you live in a right-to-work state, you don't have to pay that union dues, even though your members are paying that to keep the lights on, to pay the electric, take care of the maintenance, and everything. They're the ones that pay for that. And they still, the ones that are not union, they still get fairly represented no matter what.
And they also,
they still get the same pay too. They get everything. They get everything as a regular union member would get. They just don't pay union dues.
but they also have the right to opt out of membership.
Correct.
and
That's
not to
correct.
pay the
That's
dues.
what right to work is.
Right.
But it'd be like me joining a country club and not having to pay the dues. It's the same thing. You would,
Yeah.
it's,
Probably
know,
not a good analogy, but
It's, Madam Chair, if I may, it's a way to essentially force expanding more resources while cutting the resources coming in for the collective bargaining group. What it does is it ends up eventually bankrupting unions. They are not able to function effectively, and as a result, the contractors can and do suppress wages, relax safety standards, and it does lead to this giant race towards the bottom in quality and compensation.
May I, Madam Chair?
yes.
I have a little bit of experience in union work. I was president of the Teachers Association of Anne Arundel County. But I was also a director with the National Organization of Teachers Unions around the country. and I had 9 states under my responsibility, some of which were, what's the term?
Right to work.
Some of them, like Maryland, were required to recognize the union as the spokesperson for the employees. And then there are states like Georgia, where there is no such requirement, and it depends on the goodwill of the leadership and the union as to whether there's going to be discussions and open discussions about benefits and protections and all of that. So my understanding is that if it's an open shop, in Maryland, I was able to negotiate and get at the state level agency fee for the teachers' unions. So that meant that everybody was required to pay union dues because they had always gotten the benefits. Because when you negotiate for one, you negotiate, and for me, it was for my 6,000 members. And if they were not members, they still got almost all of those benefits, 85% of those benefits. But once we got agency fee, they were then required to pay a fee to the union. And in the last, I guess, 10 years or maybe less, it's been overturned by the Justice Department. I can't.
Janice.
Yes, it's been overturned. But that only toughens the jobs of the unions because now you've got to convince everyone that you deserve the dues that they're paying you. So that's been my understanding and my experience over 20 years of working with union shops and right-to-work states. That's my term that I forgot. Those right-to-work states, which were always more of a challenge, but at least from the education perspective, it worked. Amazingly to me, it worked.
Can I just say that we're not here just for the unions? We're here for the non-union also. Prevailing wage would make sure that they get the prevailing wage in that area, whatever that is established. And they would get, they would have every opportunity to actually save for a future as far as, a 401k and so on and so forth. We just happen to be organized labor that's here at the table. We're not here just to advocate for unions. We're advocating for non-union people too. So I just want to make that very, very clear. Thank you.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, because that was my understanding, that you're representing employees, period, whether they were union members
Construction workers.
or not.
Yes.
And in Maryland, you can do that without any barriers in your way, so.
You're not all affiliated with unions, or?
Pardon me, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I understood that you were all affiliated with unions.
Yes, we are, but we're here to advocate for everyone, not just the union.
Because if I can just introduce, my name is Jermaine Jones, 3600 O'Donnell Street, Baltimore, Maryland. The reason why is because we collectively bargain for our members. Therefore, majority of our members already make, above the minimum wage, and often and above the prevailing wage, actually. So if this was to be enacted, our members wouldn't receive any raises at all. In fact, we protect the market. We protect the workers. So this isn't going to benefit any of our members. What it's going to benefit is the workers and the residents of Annapolis. And unfortunately, because we represent the people, we're the only ones here speaking in support of it. Often there should be a lot more other employers and everything advocating for their workers as well. But often the employer, when they see the opportunity to pay their worker more money, they look at it as they'll make less money on the back end.
Director Dickinson, or put my mic on, whoever can answer this question, what is our checks and balances presently on, if they exist, on ensuring that a worker is not getting, there's a term for this, but lower wages? Is there any checks and balances that?
Are you talking about those that are working for the construction vendors that we hire?
Yeah, since this bill is specific to projects.
So that's construction And there's nothing on the finance side, so I think Director Gerald commented on what they're checking on is on the contracts
Right.
that have the prevailing wage requirements in them
Right.
on a test basis, not on a 100% basis.
How, Director Cheryl, sorry. So we have contracts, construction contracts. We've done this for a long time. We have a very detailed procurement code, and it leads me to believe that we hire qualified contractors, but how do we ensure that they are not paying their workers, I'm being, put my construction hat on, that, they're not getting scab wages or under the table or what have you? How do we prevent that?
So on those contracts that have prevailing wage requirements, like the federal Davis-Bacon contracts or state prevailing, we do exactly what we described now. If we have prevailing wage requirements in the future, we'll have to check those. So for all of the other projects, we don't prescribe that. We don't require a certain level of wages, so we don't check it. We don't have prevailing wage requirements. It's not in the code at all. So what we prescribe is the quality of work that we expect to be done, all of those types of contract requirements, but we don't prescribe any wage level that's required for these projects.
But I read our RFPs, and they're very, our RFPs are very professional and detailed and there's a lot of paperwork involved by the bidders. What does that do? I mean, doesn't that ensure that we get qualified contractors?
Yeah, and that the work that's done meets the standards that's required for the project.
Right.
So it prescribes all that, but the wages right now are all market-based.
Right.
So whatever the contractors have to pay is what they have to include in their bids to get these qualified workers, and that's part of their bid. And we don't check. We don't check that they're paying minimum wage or any other wage at all.
Getting back to your comment about pay figure, how many non-union contractors in your experience pay minimum wage?
Zero, unless it's warranted, or unless it's in the paperwork that says you got to pay prevailing wage.
And in my history, I've learned if they don't have to, they won't. The way the market is in construction is what I was going to testify towards. The lowest bid gets it. Often, whoever puts in the lowest bid often gets the project. So what that creates is a race to the bottom in the market of construction. So often material is going to cost the same. Where companies find that they can get the lowest bid is by finding cheaper labor and on the backs of the worker. So this creates an environment in which often you may have a worker working on a city-funded project, but also receiving public assistance. That's what we find out when we talk to a lot of workers that are on these non-union work sites. So in fact, as a city and as a county, you're paying twice. One, you're paying for the public assistance for that worker, and also you're paying for that worker to be on that construction project. So we're here today to say, any jobs that the city of Annapolis create should be good jobs, where someone also isn't relying upon public assistance, because that's what's often happening on your projects, unless there's already prevailing wage in it, which is coming from the state or federally funded. So we're trying to close this loophole today. And the loophole in this donut hole exists because the county of Annapolis recognized this issue. And they said, look, we're going to put prevailing wage on our project, But unfortunately, that doesn't include the city of Annapolis. So what can actually happen is you have a local resident in Annapolis working on a project in Anne Arundel County. They're receiving a great wage, able to take care of their family, put food on their table. But when that project's over and they actually start working in their own city of Annapolis, if this law isn't passed, they could receive a pay cut. They could literally receive a pay cut now because that contractor no longer has to pay prevailing wage. So they are unable to put food on their table. They are unable to take care of their family. And that creates a level of instability. And as government, I think we're responsible to make sure we create an environment which creates stability, especially when public dollars are using to build public infrastructure. So that.
What do you believe is driving the market right now? The market wages, do you believe non-union or union is driving that market?
It's non-union. Majority of the market share is.
Sorry, wasn't on mic.
To answer, majority of the market share is non-union. But as we feel like and often, at least when we talk to our contractors, union ones, they aren't as quick to bid on projects in the city of Annapolis because they know they have to compete against non-union contractors that are paying substandard wages that they can't compete against, because we're advocating for our members to receive health care, retirement benefits, and a living wage. And they're like, if I'm taking care of all that and training my employees, how can I be the contractor who's willing to pay a guy off the street for minimum wage if the only requirement of the city is to build a building and it be, and it just doesn't fall.
I think what we're looking for it appears to be a lost opportunity, and we're really looking for that data to show that we have that disparity presently, and that's what we don't seem to have. But I'll go to Alderman.
Which data in particular? I'm sorry, I missed your question.
When you said that there's workers that can't work in the city of Annapolis because their wages will be cut if they bid projects in the city of Annapolis. You said they could be making a union wage under a county project, but then they'll go into the city and their wages will be cut because it's not a prevailing wage project.
So that data does exist, though. If you look at the state's prevailing wage, for the city of Annapolis, that's one number. And if you may look at what the average worker is making on a non-prevailing wage project, 99% of that time, that wage is lower.
Sure.
And Madam Chair, for the record, I did send this pretty close to the meeting time, so I understand not being able to skim through a 23-page white paper, but I did submit to the members of this committee and to the members of the Rules Committee, where this will go next, a white page put together based upon the data from the county's prevailing wage bill, so that we will have a comparable number to a closer by jurisdiction.
But Director Jarrell said that that the county said they don't have enough data just yet.
I sent it based upon what this was put together before the prevailing wage bill passed. So it's basically looking at the form of construction costs based upon the old wages for county infrastructure projects. And since this is closely mirrored to what the county bill passed, it would give us a better one-to-one, apples-to-apples comparison.
I'm sorry, I'm breaking my own rules here. Did you gentlemen have the 2-minute speech?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I kind of threw mine
Sound like
in
you had a
there.
prepared speech, so why don't we let that happen? I'm so sorry. It's just...
Yes, Mike Moneymaker again, business manager for Heat and Frost Insulators and Allied Workers. The bill for prevailing wage is that it levels the playing field for every contractor that chooses to bid on a job. To make it very simple and less than 2 minutes, is that the state of Maryland does a wage survey every year for the entire state, for every county in the state, including Baltimore City, okay? They do a wage survey. They send it out to every contractor that is registered in the state of Maryland. Doesn't matter union or non-union, okay? Doesn't matter. They ask them to send in every job that they've done within the state for that year, okay? From September the 30th to October the 31st of the following year. They take that, the state takes that data for every county. And when they take that data from every county, they see what are the wages that are being paid. Those wages that end up prevailing are union wages, which is called the area standard wages. So that when the job is being bidded, and if it's state funded, you know, with $250,000 or more, that job is automatically, you know, a prevailing wage job. And for whatever reason, the union wages are the ones, and the union contractors and the union members are the ones that turns that data in year after year after year. It's an area standard wages. When any contractor chooses to pay below the area standard wages, they're cheating their employees. They're not giving their employees a fair day pay for a fair day's worth of work. And if you look at that, you can go on the Maryland State Department of Labor website, and you will be able to see every wage rate for every county, including Baltimore City. Prince George's County has their own prevailing wage. Montgomery County has theirs. Baltimore County has theirs. Baltimore City has theirs. Now we're asking that the city of Annapolis takes care of their constituents. Every dollar that a person makes that lives in Annapolis, 80 cents of that dollar is put right back into the community that they live. When you don't have that, 80 cents for every dollar, the city's losing money. The city itself is losing money.
I explain that. What do you mean losing? How's the losing money part?
Well, because you have people that, if you have workers come in from Virginia, if you have workers come in from West Virginia, you have workers come in from Delaware, you have workers come in from New Jersey, they come in here and they do the work. When they go back home, they're taking that money back home. The only money that they're spending here is maybe 20% of the wages that they earn. Mm-hmm. We're spending 80% of every dollar we make right in our own area.
Madam Chair, to reuse a metaphor that I did for the Economic Gardening pilot program, local economies are a lot like a bathtub. You have the water, the money circulating around the tub itself. You have water, money going down the drain. That's money leaving our local economy. And then you have money coming in from the spout. That's money coming back in. This guarantees that we are more likely to keep the water, the money, circulating around our local economy and our local stores and our local shops and our local residences, rather than a higher likelihood of it going down the drain out of our area.
But the city of Annapolis doesn't have enough workers to support our projects. They do come from Delaware. They come across the bridge. They come from Pennsylvania. They come from Virginia. They come from Maryland. We're in a multi-state area.
Which is part of the reason why with the local hiring provision, I was very understanding that the city of Annapolis alone does not have the construction worker population to do all of our own finances alone. And I expanded the local hiring provision out to Anne Arundel County. That said, if someone is coming in from Severna Park, from Arnold, from Glen Burnie, from South County to do a project in Annapolis, they're going to come back to Annapolis. I'm confident enough that that distance is close enough, or we're still going to see a pretty significant benefit from that local spending, and those people that, while they may not live within the city limits, will still be definitely coming back into the cultural capital of Anne Arundel County.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
So I have a couple of questions. Thank you very much. Kind of along that line. One, if we were to pass this today, what effects on our current budget of the 9 projects would that have?
Turn your mic on.
Wouldn't
Sorry. If we were to pass this today
apply.
or tomorrow, do you have an idea of what effect it would have on the current budget?
This action has no effect on the budget. If you're asking whether it will cost us more, I think the contract prices for the construction in progress could not be impacted because we've already set a contract form. I don't know if you can retroactively apply this to construction contracts in place, and that would be more Public Works and legal question.
Yeah, I think your question is, so on a going forward basis, if you pass this, is this going to increase the cost of construction contracts? I think we don't know that right now. I know that right now it's market-based for our projects, and the market is really tight for construction workers. So construction workers are seeing the benefit of shortages in their pay. and that's expected to continue in the future. But I don't know. I don't think it's going to have any effect, because I think the market rates are going to have to catch up to the prevailing wage rates. And so even without this, you're going to see sort of an evening of wages that contractors are going to have to pay, just because we're so short on skilled construction workers right now.
Right, on sort of a national level.
On a national level, not just regionally.
That's what AGC is saying.
So in conjunction to that, and talking about this ordinance requiring the local hiring requirements, and I understand that if you're coming from Severna Park, yes, you're probably spending money in Annapolis, but we have often seen, I know that somebody that just did work on my chimney came, and I know that that's a much smaller project, we could only find somebody from Delaware to do the project. So how far are we going to expand local? And if we had a project that only one person bid upon, does that hinder us in bidders to different projects?
Well, I'm sorry.
I'll talk to the bill specifically, and then I'll allow for.
All of us here represent a local union, and the word local is really the main piece of that. We have members that live in and around Annapolis that would love to work here instead of drive to Northern Virginia. So in addition, I've had this question asked several times. Maybe Mike could speak to this also. I've been asked, do we have any trouble getting labor? Is there a labor shortage within union membership? And that there is not. We have over 450 union sheet metal worker apprentices, and we have no trouble getting people to come to work, because we pay a higher wage and we provide benefits that will last an individual lifetime.
So am I to then understand that your local union workers are not coming to Annapolis because we don't have prevailing wage, and they're going to Virginia instead?
That's correct. There's a lot of data centers that are being built over there. They're working in DC and Montgomery and Prince George, not only Northern Virginia, but I mean, I lived in Severna Park, and I drove 75 miles each way to Northern Virginia for the company I was working for before I became a business representative. And I did that for 5 years straight. So I would love to come here. Actually, I did have a project here at the Naval Academy. I did all the testing, balancing, and commissioning on the officers' homes. Is probably 15 or 20 years ago, but that's the closest I've ever worked. I've always had to run up Route 50 or go down 95. So we have the same situation here in the Annapolis area. As I said before, not all of my members live in the city of Annapolis. We know what the cost of housing in the city of Annapolis is, but they live right on the edge or just in one or two wards of the city of Annapolis. So we would all of my members would love to work here.
And we have members of the building construction trades unions that are direct residents of the city itself. In my ward, I have a couple members of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters in the Primrose Acres area. Riding my bike here on Tyler Avenue, there were some folks out in their front yard with their IBEW Local 24 or 26. I couldn't see the back number, but it was one of the 20s, which are based either in the Baltimore area or the Prince George's County area. So we do have members of the building trades that live in the city of Annapolis, but without the prevailing wage contract, jobs aren't really coming in that are worth their time and training. And as far as also bringing in local workers, the local hiring provision to kind of calm you if we end up in those situations where the only person willing to come in was from an area. The best efforts was both in the county bill and in this bill left a little vague, where if we end up in a situation where we cannot reach that threshold, it's not going to sink the project itself. So we do have some flexibility. And then second, a big component of that local hiring provision is to bring people into this career field entirely. As we all know, not everybody can afford the high cost of a 4-year college or have any interest in going into a 4-year or even a 2-year college. And the building trades is a perfect opportunity to give people a livable wage and a long-term career path. Even if we end up going with the prevailing wage bill and hire a non-union contracting firm, that is going to be giving people on that project immediately a good source of money for them to provide for themselves and their family. And if we end up going with union contracting firms, that gives people direct training both in the classroom and on the job where they are getting paid to learn, or instead of going into debt to learn a career path, they're actually making some money in their pocket and then going into this long-term way to become a eventual journeyman.
Thank you.
Did everyone have their 2 minutes?
Actually,
If I could just mention one last thing, my closing remarks and my testimony was, today we're not asking for anyone to be paid any outrageous salary or anything. We're just asking for basically the prevailing wage, the standard wage of what they do. What it says is what a carpenter should make, what a plumber should make. This isn't any astronomical, pay increases or salaries for folks. We're just asking them to pay a carpenter what a carpenter should be paid. The problem is often in the city of Annapolis, that carpenter isn't paid a carpenter's wage, which is what your public works director was talking about today. And only because there's a labor shortage are contractors starting to pay people what they're actually worth. And that's because there's a labor shortage. Now, the problem is we won't always be in a situation where there's a labor shortage in construction. In the moment that no longer exists, that carpenter will no longer be paid that carpenter's wage. And what we're trying to do today is make sure that when a carpenter's working on a project as a carpenter in the city of Annapolis, he's being paid what the average carpenter is being paid. And often that isn't the case in any of the crafts. And like I said before, the county of Annapolis recognized this issue, and they fixed it by establishing the prevailing wage. And, we would hope that the city of Annapolis do the same thing as well.
Okay, can I just zero out and look at the sort of like the national stuff going on? We have a lot of federal money in infrastructure work nationally that I'm sure are paying prevailing wage, and contractors are going there to those projects. Hence, there is this labor shortage, and compounded with that is the post-pandemic struggles. My angst on this is just a bubble here. I mean, we can't drive the market in the city of Annapolis. Shouldn't we wait until this? I mean, I think you're still, from my research, I believe the unions right now, there's obviously fewer union jobs. Only 13.6% of all construction industry employees are union. So that's a huge national effort that the unions are trying, that's a problem. I don't believe we're back to, and I'm reading ENR, Engineering News Record, and Ken, the chief economist, Ken Simonson. The unions are still recovering from the pandemic and this labor shortage. I don't know, tell me how this is going to fix that.
I don't know why we keep coming back to the union. I'm confused. Because
we're talking, so you're saying not to equate prevailing wage to union?
That's correct.
Madam Chair, this bill is different from what would be a project labor agreement, which would guarantee that the public infrastructure would go to a union shop. What this is it establishes an oversight
Level playing field.
Evens the playing field. It basically establishes if we're doing a public infrastructure project, this is going to be the minimum wage that we will have our contractors pay the workers for these public.
But we have that already.
Yes, but it is what I would say is insufficient.
Why?
If I can say, you have a minimum wage in which the minimum wage applies for every job everywhere, like the man or woman working at McDonald's or the man or woman working at, the tire shop. What prevailing wage sets is a minimum wage for a skilled craft construction worker. So what often is that skilled craft construction worker currently in Annapolis, the minimum he has to make is the minimum you pay the fry guy at McDonald's. And that's not going to give you the level of carpentry or the level of masonry work to build a building that's going to last the city. And often that's where people find a worker, or that whoever working for that minimum McDonald wage is going to give you minimum McDonald craftsmanship. And the prevailing wage will set a minimum standard for each craft, a plumber, electrician, based upon what the standard is in your area.
For construction contracts.
Yes.
Right. And if you have,
Construction contracts.
For both union and non-union.
and as long as the non-union has a bona fide apprenticeship program, they're going to have some sort of training also that's going to guarantee that they are somewhat skilled. We believe ours is the best. I mean, that's why I said somewhat skilled in their trade. And so I'm not sure about the component. Does this have a component, the bill have a component in there about having an apprenticeship program?
The bill does not have a component in there. It establishes the prevailing wage threshold, and it establishes the local hiring, but it again doesn't guarantee apprenticeship programs. But it's one of those things where while the bill does not guarantee it, it does make it a lot more likely.
It does include an apprenticeship.
It does?
Yes.
All right. Missed that. I apologize. I heavily copied from the county.
So I'm getting outside our guardrails of financial review. I didn't want to get into the merits. What we have in front of us is some potential fiscal impact of adding staff to administer the project. There is this logical, and I might need help from the director of DPW to explain this. As you know, gentlemen, the less bidders on a project, the less competitive it is. And we don't know yet from the county if it has that impact. They will be bidding projects with this stipulation. I would like to see whether or not that increases, maybe, or decreases their bid coverage. And again, using the logic that if there's more bidders, the project has more competitive pricing, that's a good thing. To offset the additional staff that we would need to procure this. The other thing I need to bring up in discussion with my colleagues is we don't have the city manager here. And I would like to know, he manages all the departments, and
We'd be glad to come back and talk to him if need be.
well, I saw it is going to rules, but I'm not ready to.
It's coming to rules, but not until next month, I believe.
And in regards to your first question, I can testify today that, on the behalf of our over 1,000 contractors who do work throughout the state of Maryland, a lot of them would be more interested in bidding on projects in the city of Annapolis if there was a prevailing wage requirement. So I can know, at least on the behalf of our contractors, there would be an increased level of interest.
And that's union contract.
Yes, those are union contracts I'm speaking.
Madam Chair, I would like to see and hear from those that are not union, because I think we now have put it in our heads that prevailing wage is directly connected to union representation.
Oh, no, they're saying otherwise.
No,
Yeah, it's not.
It's not direct because the Maryland State does a wage survey every year. They send it out to every
I'm
contractor.
trying to find that survey right now. That's what I've been, and I can't find it. I'm sure it's there, but if you have a direct link, because I'd love to see it, but since you mentioned it.
Because each county has their own for a plumber,
That's what I'm.
electrician,
Yeah.
pipe fitter, pile driver, laborer, carpenter, insulator, hazmat worker. All of them have their different rates. What we're asking is for the prevailing wage is that whatever craft that you're at, if you're a plumber, you're going to get the area standard wages that the state of Maryland is saying.
That's what you mean by prevailing wage.
Yes, area standard. That's area standard wages. So if the state of Maryland is saying that asbestos workers makes $54 an hour total package, including benefits, that's what that insulator would make on that project, including the fringe benefits.
And I understand that, and that's why I'd love to see the chart, and I've been searching for it, but I'll continue. But I think we need to take union out of it. And if we're gonna have additional hearings, I'll speak to the alderman to bring us folks, not just union folks, because I think that sends the message that it's all about union folks, and it's not. So I'm just trying to help figure out how we can move forward with this.
But if I could say one thing, the difference between union and non-union is unions often represent the worker. If you have a contractor come in here who's not union, he's going to speak on the behalf of his business.
Yes.
I hate to say it, and that's going to be the fact of it. And he's going to want his business structure to be, I pay whatever my worker, whatever I want to pay them. So if you think you're going to have a contractor who's non-union to come and say, I'm looking forward to paying my workers more, often you probably won't hear that. We're here today because we're talking for the worker, and unfortunately, workers aren't able to come here at 10 o'clock every day to testify because they have to be on the work site working. Or else we could have members here testifying to support as workers, but a contractor won't, because the contractor is going to often lean towards the idea of, I take care of my people well, allow me to run my business how I want to run it. And, often it's up to the county to run their business how they would like to run it. And part of your business is making sure, the residents receive a fair wage.
And picking off that, we currently use a non-union contractor in city projects, Reliable. So if representatives from Reliable Contracting come in, they're going to come in and give their flowery business model of, we take good care of our folks, we do the job right, and we've had such a good relationship with the city. That said, we've seen what happens when, we have a contractor for these projects that doesn't pay these prevailing wages. They aren't able to keep up with our city standards. Like the Parkside Preserve project, I know it's not a city infrastructure thing, but we saw a good example of them not being able to keep up with our basic rules and regulations for management. So we could bring Reliable in. I think it's just going to be a more business pitch of, this is how we do things, and our people are good and taken care of, and we don't need to have any more interference. The status quo is good.
Alderman, I was making my comment so that we could broaden our database or our content on this subject, not in opposition to the union representation and the voices that are here. Just trying to give us a little more expansion. We always like to see what I say is both sides of the coin. And so we have heard from these gentlemen, and they have convinced me, not that I needed convincing, of the value of representation. Now let's hear, like I said, we heard from one contractor the other night, and he said, just as you just said, Mike, lost your last name, I'm sorry. He takes care of his people. He pays good salaries for his people. So he's good. He says this legislation is trying to find a problem. It's a piece of legislation without a cause. So I'm trying to get us to a point where everyone is going to be accepting and understanding of the many things that are in this legislation. And there's a lot of pieces to this. And I think it would help us, and speaking to Ms. Reuter, when we get this, we need a list of all of the components, because there must be 12 different components in this legislation. So do we support all of them? We'll see what the amendments look like, if they're amendments.
The one thing I just kind of like to ask is, or let you think about, is the federal government in the state of Maryland, in Anne Arundel County, doing the wrong thing by prevailing wage?
Did they do the wrong thing?
Are they doing the wrong thing by paying prevailing wage?
I think we've heard that it's too soon to tell. Because it's only been 2 years. I think that's what I heard.
Well, the federal government's been paying under Davis-Bacon prevailing wage since the 1930s, and the state of Maryland's paid it for as long as I can remember, and I'm 61 years old. So the county is new, but I'm saying just keep that in mind. I feel they are, those three municipalities, if you want to call them that, they're doing the right thing, and we're asking you to do the right thing. That's all.
Well, you've just given us another strength for your argument for the case, because the federal government's been doing it since the 30s, you said?
Yeah, that's when this under Davis-Bacon, and that was put forth. Davis-Bacon was put forth by the Republican Party because the federal government was being ripped off by shoddy contractors. And so that's everything that falls under Davis-Bacon. Yes, it's been since the 30s.
So the federal government, and that's spoken to because it's mentioned in the legislation, I believe, but the state government has been using prevailing wage for a long time, 30, 40 years maybe?
Yeah, I've been in the trade 40 years, and they, for as long as I can remember, yes.
Okay, and the county, we're the last to get involved. I'll just put it like that.
The county's a little different.
The county's a little different, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're last, we're slow, but we're trying to get there. But it's already in place and has been in place for a long time. So this is not a new concept. It's just one that we're trying to share with the city workers. So I would have one question for the alderman, and that is, you mentioned the word class. You get a better class of employees. I'd like to have because that's disturbing to me.
I meant that not in the sense of social or financial class. I mean that in quality would have been a better thing. You are getting a more qualified. Thank you. Qualified would have been the better word choice. I apologize.
And more professional.
More professional. I do not mean that in the sense of social class. I do not mean that in the sense of financial class. I'm a kid who grew up hill folk in northern Maine. I get it. Y'all have seen me when I react to people when I feel like someone's acting like they are higher than I am. So I'm definitely not meaning to discredit folks based upon financial status, economic status.
Thank you.
So we can argue this on a lot of different levels. I'm guilty of trying to, argue it on a national level. My colleague just showed me a map of prevailing wages state by state, and we're higher than DC. So where do the workers go? There's so many, moving parts. But I would suggest to my colleagues, we have a fiscal impact statement in front of us. We have a staff report in front of us. And this is what they basically say in simple terms is, okay, whatever it is, it's going to there's a cost to administer, and that cost from the fiscal analysis is just not knowing, but based on the county, they added 3 new positions, and Director Dickinson estimated that this would put in a recurring expense of salary of $234,000. So logically, we need to weigh that add against the benefits. We do not know the benefits. We have hopes, we have inspiration, we have, just that whole, issue that really isn't before us as far as the benefits of union versus non-union and their regulations versus this and that. But I think I would entertain a motion to vote on it with those facts. Do we want to add this recurring expense without knowing what the benefits are? So I'm ready to vote. And it will have subsequent review, and we can, we can all as council attend that meeting and address any other outstanding issues.
Madam Chair, our Assistant City Attorney, Ms. Leonard, has her hand up.
Hi.
And I might be overstepping my bounds because obviously I'm not in the Public Works Department, but a potential benefit is if you get more quality workers, you would have less change orders. You would have potentially less delays, and you would potentially have less having to go back to fix problems that are caused. Now that's obviously an unquantifiable benefit, but it is a reality. I've been in this industry not as long as Director Gerald, but I have been doing construction law for about 15 years now, and that sometimes you do get what you pay for.
And that, if I can just add, that's what the study in Indiana found.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're getting really low bids, you could have the potential for additional paperwork for change orders. Now, I don't know how that will all weigh out, but it is an unquantifiable benefit on the back end.
And I would like to piggyback on that. Again, I understand this is an investment on the front end. Just as when I dramatically showmanly showed off the Red Wing boots, I had to pay more on that. But you look at what we save by having in this better, more professional workforce that gives you a better product that will last longer. We come into this concept of you pay once, you cry once, you pay twice, you cry twice. And so if we get something that we get it done correctly the first time, that's less time and energy that we're going to have to spend coming back, repairing, and readdressing these projects.
Okay, go ahead.
Madam Chair, we have some examples under our belt of going for the lowest bidder. And for some reason, the police department, the renovations and addition, I guess we did at the police department. I don't know whether, Mr. Jarrell, were you here at that time?
I was not, but I would be cautious to say that across the board that union contractors do better work than, and I certainly would ask Alderwoman Tierney if her experience with Turner when they switched over, if there was a big decrease in change orders or quality work.
Absolutely not.
In my 40 years, I have not seen that
No.
there's a clear distinction between the two types. And I think if you brought in some contractors that have experienced both, that they're good contractors that do good work. It's not because they're union or not union. It's because they take care of their people, as some are going to say, and they have a work ethic and they have a quality ethic that goes throughout the company. So and again, I'm not against this at all. I'm agnostic about this bill. I think we want to pay our workers a fair wage, and I think we want to hire locally. So I'm really supportive of that, especially that we hire as much as we can locally. But I would just be cautious of saying that, the wingtip example that non-union contractors do bad work and that union contractors do good work. I don't think it's that clear cut.
And I don't think that's what the panel is trying to represent.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I know, I hear you. I heard you. Yeah.
But as the bill states, a bona fide apprenticeship program. We want good quality workers and good quality work for the city of Annapolis.
I don't think we, as Director Jarrell said, we're not arguing the merits. It's just, again, I'm pretty stubborn about data and making decisions. We are stewards of the budget, and if we're putting this upfront money in when we don't have the data to see from the county yet whether or not it works, so I think that having that data would be very necessary in order to make this decision.
Yeah, and if I could just say one last thing.
Yeah.
As an organizer, union organizer, I've gone throughout the state and different counties and throughout the county of Annapolis and talked to workers working on projects. And through my conversations, I've ran across workers who are working on projects, public funded projects, but also receiving public assistance. And, if you're worried about an upfront cost, that is an additional cost that you're incurring. When you have workers that have working full-time jobs but can still qualify to receive public assistance. And through the testimony we've heard from the Public Works Director, you asked whether or not there was any other checks and balances in place requiring someone being paid a decent wage. He said no, there aren't on these public funded projects. So, if you're worried about from the financial aspect, this can have a great and positive impact on those situations where you can also, it's baked in where you have those checks and balances to make sure someone's being paid an honest, fair wage where you aren't paying twice, and on the back end that exists.
And that would involve, additional rules and procedures. Director Dickinson has had her hand up. Sorry.
I just want to make sure you knew I have something that I wanted to add. You talked about the fiscal analysis that I did that talked about adding 2 employees,
Yeah.
I would think in this situation, it's going to be better to try to contract the work out.
Okay.
Now, I don't have any idea what that's going to cost. Right now, in our current projects that require prevailing wages, there's work done on an audit basis, on a test basis. This legislation requires 100% accumulation of payroll and regular testing, and I think that from a contractual basis, that could be expensive. Some years we might not have that many projects in process, and some years we would have more. And the idea would be then to contract it out to some project management company like Erie that's doing some of the work for us now. But their hourly charges are substantial.
So I offer my colleagues 2 suggestions. One is, and I don't know the correct lingo, is if we just defer a decision. We'll defer. Is that, what does defer do?
As opposed to postpone?
Yeah, there's a difference. I think it would be,
I think we would have to defer. We're looking to you, Ms. Gaines.
My understanding is defer means it still gets out of committee, postponement means we're going to have another hearing of finance.
it comes back to us?
Oh, I'm sorry, my microphone
No,
was off.
defer means you don't get it back.
For the record, what I had said was my understanding is defer means, or maybe I'm mixing this up with no action.
I think you're
I'm mixing it up with no action. So what I said was wrong, and it doesn't matter.
Regina said we should defer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I have a question.
Oh,
Ms. Dickinson.
go ahead.
I would like to see an amendment that would speak to the staffing piece. I heard Director Gerald say that in the situations where we're using prevailing wage, somebody is managing the paperwork on that. Is there a way to reduce the cost if we contracted it out, as opposed to what, 234,000? Could it be done with 100,000? With some restrictions, or I don't know. I'm just trying to think out of the box to come up with a point where it's acceptable. I think that we could go to the state and to the federal government if we need other examples. The county isn't our only option. Others have been doing it far longer. If we're concerned about the data pending, we can look to other sources. I just think that we just need to think differently about how this could be done. I support the employees and the contract employees. So I would like to see this legislation passed. I just want to get beyond the hurdles, the obstacles in the way. And one of them, obviously, is the fiscal concern. So how could, and I'll ask Alderman Sandemeyer, how could we amend this so that it's not going to cost us as much money?
I am meeting with the finance director tomorrow, along with the Director Gerald again, and I believe Manager Malinoff, to go over a couple of the things. Director Gerald and I have already had a conversation because this slightly changes the definition of capital project from 50,000 to 100,000, but I still want this to kick in at the 100,000 point. So we've discussed a minor amendment on that front that wouldn't change what this bill does, but puts a set clarity into the city code. Yep, we're meeting tomorrow. I guess is that to answer your question, to go over a couple of the concerns brought forward, ways that we can still keep the core essences of this bill to make sure that our infrastructure contractors are paid for a fair day's work, while also addressing some of the potential budgetary and staffing issues on the city front.
So, Madam Chair, do you want a motion to defer
I think we have to.
02522? I will make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, go for it.
Vote?
Oh, that was a second.
Yeah.
All in favor of deferring this legislation signify by saying aye.
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 Okay.
All
Thank you,
right.
gentlemen.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, I think we are at the end of our agenda, and we have, thank you, Director Gerald.
And thank you, Ms. Leonard and Ms. Dickinson.
And thank you, gentlemen. I'm sorry, the
All the
gentleman in the
support.
back,
Sir,
Hi.
did you want to speak?
Oh, he's here for something.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, I think we have an update from Director Dickinson. Last week was exciting because we heard first about the concession agreement.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So some of the more important things that, I won't say important, I shouldn't say important, that I'm working on right now is I'm working with our financial advisors and bond counsel to prepare for a bond sale that we will be doing hopefully at the beginning of December, but that takes a lot of steps and a lot of planning with work with the rating agencies. So that's started up. We're gathering the documentation now for that. We're still working on hiring. We did hire an accountant. That's starting in October. We're doing a lot of interviewing now for a couple of the other positions, but no specific candidates there for hiring. We're still in the process of looking through the applicants. And in the last few weeks, one of the billing, the accounting associates that does billing handed in her resignation. She's going to work for the federal government. So now we have another opening to fill on that side. So we're very busy.
How's
Yes.
procurement vacancy?
Procurement, I've been checking the applicants on that position, and I haven't found any that stand out with the kind of experience and, the kind of government procurement experience we're looking at. I may end up scheduling a couple interviews with them, but so right now we're still have James in the acting capacity.
Alderman Finlayson?
May I ask? Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Dickinson, with the legislation we were just discussing, the position would fall in your department.
It doesn't have to. The reason that we stipulated that is the county put it in their purchasing arm. The purchasing department's involved at the start of the projects. When you put the request for proposals out on the street, you put in there what your expectations are. This is something that would go into every contract. And in a big organization, that branch of the government would probably monitor compliance with contractual requirements. But these are very specific to capital projects, which are involved with, our procurement staff is involved at the beginning, but heavily managed by Public Works on an ongoing basis and on the backside. And they're currently doing this for certain contracts now. So it's got to be some kind of combined effort, including it in the contract. The monitoring and enforcement does not have to be in finance. It's just when they were ready to put the legislation out, it was like, where does this go? Does it go here or does it go there? And the county put it in central services. So I said that it would be purchasing is under finance. Not that I think that's where it belongs, either here or at the county, but that's not my say. So I think Public Works is heavily involved in it, and they're the ones that would have access to the information on a regular basis.
So maybe there should be an amendment that speaks to that, where it would be placed. I don't think we should leave it to guess or figure out later.
I think what it does, if I may, is it basically gives the responsibility right now to DPW, because right now he is a project manager is assigned for each project or multiple projects, and this is typically a role of the construction manager, right? So we're essentially becoming a construction manager in DPW managing these projects, and part of that responsibility would be these checks and balances. So that is a suggestion.
That's how it's currently done now. It would be a shift and probably a new training process to move it to finance. Since I'm in all of the worlds, I mean, realistically, we don't do it on a lot, but the ones who are trained to do this are not in purchasing or finance. They are currently in public works.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you would have to extend that training.
I just think it needs to be clear where it goes.
I wonder if the
So,
county bill
yeah.
says that.
And it's my opinion that
In their
it's,
central services, we
should-
don't have
Oh,
one
that's right,
anymore.
he says that. Sorry.
I'm sorry. we don't have
I
the
would
central
say it more logically links to the process we're currently doing on some of our contracts that do have prevailing wage requirements in them. So that is either the project manager engineer from DPW or a hired outside engineering firm is doing this follow-up. But this enforcement work that is laid out in the legislation is very thorough. It's like they have to send us their biweekly payrolls every biweekly period. That's a whole records keeping process. So if we do it in-house, it's definitely going to keep at least one whole person busy.
Oh, you mentioned
So
outsourcing.
if it changes so that it's more flexible as to how often we test, how often the process has to be done, on the local hiring, if I remember the wording correctly, the local hiring provisions are more like they have to prove that they're doing their best effort to hire locally, but I don't think there's any mandatory requirement that they hire locally. So that one is kind of vague and doesn't put a lot of restrictions, but the enforcement on the prevailing wage information, that looked kind of extensive to me, but I don't know how it compares to what Heary or our engineers are currently doing.
So you mentioned something where, we'll circle back to, is, and we don't have the answer, and I don't know how we get it, is what percentage of our current projects are prevailing wage? And that goes back to the
I
question.
thought Mr. Darrow told us.
It's very small.
Yeah. It's not
You
that
can pull it. I mean, because I read most of the RFP, they would put it in the procurement process. If Davis-Bacon applies, it goes right into the procurement package.
Oh, I'm not talking about the number of jobs. It's more important the volume, I think. Like
Right
those kind of
now,
jobs would-
I'd still think it'd probably be a smaller amount. I mean, trying to compare us to, because I've worked for bigger counties, trying to compare what we do with a larger county is going to be kind of an apple and orange scenario because we just don't do the same volume.
Right.
Similarly, our procurement office is much smaller than most county procurement offices. So you're dealing with,
Right.
it's not that it would not have an impact, it would, and it would definitely take fiscal time, but the number of projects that you hit once you do all the exceptions that were listed there, I don't think we're talking a massive percentage. I would think it would be a smaller, it'd probably be closer to what we do now, maybe slightly higher.
Yeah.
So the county needed 3 people to do it, and we're a fraction of the size of the county. So the assumption would be that maybe we'd need 1 person, maybe we wouldn't need a whole person.
It would depend on the year.
So that's why I'm suggesting it be done contractually
Right.
attached to the contracts themselves for whoever is hired as the project manager. But keep in mind that
Project managers, let's say Heary, they're not cheap, and if we require them to collect every payroll of every contractor that's working on the job and sort through that and monitor the wages for everything, every pay period, that could get to be expensive. So I'm just saying that it's easier to do it contractually because we may have 10 projects in process, we may have 2. We may have 1, we may have none. So because it's so variable, bringing a body on to do this work may not make sense, but contractors are not.
And
not
the
cheap.
nature of construction projects is that, I call them, they're all A to Z jobs. The process is the same regardless, of the volume. It can be a $100,000 renovation or a $100 million project. You still have to go through that trades.
And it will increase the cost of the contract because the engineering firm or whoever the project manager is, the cost is going to increase.
Yeah,
So-
But could that be written into the RFP?
it would have to be, I think.
Well, yes, it has to be. Here, we're going to, just that they have to pay prevailing wages.
Okay, we want them to have to, follow prevailing wages, but what about requiring them to have the project manager to?
They can't hire the project manager.
So you're gonna run into conflicts, because then if they're paying for the person who's supposed to be monitoring them, that raises a legal issue, because even if you just have them, you could maybe do it, but it gets into a gray area if you have the person who's supposed to be monitoring in any way involved with hiring the person who's supposed to be
Just trying to come up with some other options.
Yeah. I think in a larger government where you had more consistently these types of jobs, the hiring a body would be like the easy answer. But until we're like a couple years in, we'll have no idea what the flow will be and which jobs this will hit. So it's you could hire a person to do it, but I feel like they should probably also have something to do when there aren't any of these jobs in a given year. So
It's a timely thing too, because on the plus side, if this attracts workers, then, we would have them for these, this major infrastructure project we're starting downtown and all. But then again, that one does get federal money, so prevailing wages will be in the RFP.
Well, and that's why I said, when you go through like all the exceptions, it could kick out a lot of the projects that you would think of, because they would already have it.
This is more for the low volume jobs where prevailing wages isn't in there.
Yeah, I mean, like your basic utility type jobs, things of that nature. But I think the reason the county probably didn't have any real information to share is that they're probably going through this growing phase to try and figure out which jobs it applies to, how it applies.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of a tricky.
So I think I got out of Brooks's. No, I don't know if I did or not, but is he trying to help our constituent base by giving them job opportunities? Is that a driving force?
I think that was one of his missions, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Could we change the frequency of the reporting? Is that mandated anywhere?
No, I mean, my understanding, and I brought into this very last minute, but my understanding is that they basically copied and pasted the Anne Arundel County statute. So I'm not sure where Anne Arundel County.
Is that where it came from?
Yes, I happened to double check, and it looks 98% similar to what the county law looks like when I was previewing it. So I'm not sure how the county came up with their particular standards.
But I would think that if you didn't have it every week, then that could be cause for
If you didn't have the reporting.
Yeah, if you didn't have the reporting every week, then as somebody who is a supervisor, can I, knowing that, get away with, well, this week I'm not paying you because it rained 4 days, so to speak. If you're doing it every week, then there's a consistency. If you're, looking at the reports every single week of John X was paid for 5 days, he was paid $20 an hour for 5 days. I would think that if the supervisor knew that it wasn't always being checked, that there could be opportunities for fraudulent behavior.
So I would think it would be, whatever process you'd set up, if it wasn't 100%, it would be random, and it would be without warning and have access to any of their records at any time. And I don't know how here you would do that. They would probably say, I'm checking, I'm going to check your prevailing wages this week. Give me last week's payroll. And just do it on a spot check, random basis like that. Now, it may be that they're collecting all of them, and I'm not aware of that. They may be collecting all payrolls and just checking them randomly. So, I mean, there's that option too. The steps in the legislation sound pretty thorough. Like, you had to collect it, and you had to check it. And if you saw something that didn't, to me, it looked like 100% checking. So I would want to, it would be easier to make that less restrictive, more flexible, but still random. As a an auditor by trade, I want to make it random and a surprise and not anticipated as to what's going to happen and when they're going to be looking at the wages.
So hopefully Alderman Sandemeyer
You're still listening?
I'm on.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think I'd like for Alderman Sandemeyer to come back with some amendments that he's accepting of.
Oh, there he is.
Speaking
Yeah.
of the devil.
Yeah, we deferred, but what are we doing now?
We were just discussing, I don't know how we got to this. Ms. Dickinson was giving us her report. But I was wondering if you would come back with some amendments of your own that will help us to address the cost.
Meeting with the director Dickinson tomorrow.
Okay.
Basically, I don't want to commit to saying like, yes, I'll do this and this and this until I hear what like some of the specifics in not a one-on-one, but like a little meeting where we can go out in detail. I'm very open to doing that. I'm trying to work with our departments, especially Manager Gerald, who I met with a couple times through this process, and I'm just really excited about this.
Well, to hear from you.
Can you humor me my colleagues humor me just for my reality check on construction is okay. So the majority of our projects, not the majority, but the majority of our high volume projects are federally funded. You know, when I say high volume, I mean the infrastructure projects. The infrastructure projects, because that's what capital improvements are. The FEMA projects, et cetera. So they'll require Davis-Bacon. The lower, what?
I would just say, when you're talking infrastructure, like our roadway projects?
Oh, I meant like city dock.
Oh, okay,
Like
so,
pump
yeah, so a lot of our money goes into roadways and utilities.
Yeah.
And those are almost all funded by non-federal sources. Every once in a while, we'll get a grant, but those are, I thought that's what you were referring to when you said infrastructure. I was like, those kind of ongoing high dollar, high volume projects are funded with mostly city monies.
So the smaller volume projects, say the renovation at Stanton Center, if we implement a prevailing wage, a contractor, sheet metal contractor, for example, you have gutter work at Stanton Center or you have framing at another project, he's gonna say, oh, I think I'm gonna go, to the bigger project, even though they both pay prevailing wage. I think I'm going to go to the more reliable big project, which leaves the trades that aren't typically, prevailing wage, like painters and laborers and those that want to work on Stanton Center and these smaller jobs. I believe it hurts them, and that's there's a lot of our residents that are entrepreneurs in these companies and they want to work for the city, but they don't pay their employees a prevailing wage. I hope they pay them a satisfactory wage, but contractors go where the money is, that's correct, but it also it doesn't always work that it's to our advantage in the sense of everyone getting work. In this environment, we really want everybody to be able to work.
One of the things in talking to Mr. Moneymaker's predecessor, Brian Cavey, with the insulators, working with him, those folks come in on precisely smaller scale projects like Stanton Center renovations, along with the laborers who go on to projects of various sizes and various types. So they're still supportive of these types of provisions because it does open up their skilled members to a little bit more options where otherwise they may not be willing to jump onto due to a lower pay point.
Yeah.
Also, I apologize for leaving. I thought we were done with the bill, so I wasn't meaning to dip out.
The other recommended amendment is just to have definitions. Up front, since it would probably be in the front of the procurement section of the code, like what is prevailing wage, there's terms there that not everybody understands.
Sure. Aren't the definitions there, though? I thought at the beginning there was.
There are some.
Yeah, just to scour through and see if there's any that are, but I don't think we're making formal.
Yeah, and again, one of the recommended amendments that came from Manager Gerald or not manager,
Director.
director general. I do this about 50-50 still. I'll get it right eventually. One of them was, again, the current, per staff report, the current standard of a capital project is defined at $50,000, but this would accidentally redefine it at $100,000. He was like, we still want to keep that $50,000 definition. So we're going to amend it just to put a little clarity that $50,000 is still a capital project, but the prevailing wage provision comes in at like our serious investments at the $100,000 or more level.
Right, yeah.
So again, I'm very happy to meet with folks. I'm very happy to
Right.
kind of talk on it. I sent you all this morning a couple white papers and some breakdowns, and then I found a specific study out of Wisconsin that was not behind a paywall. That was probably my biggest issue for finding studies on this is paywalls. But I sent that out to you guys when Wisconsin removed its prevailing wage rule and some of the negative consequences that happened for that. Answer some of the questions brought up here.
Do they have impact to small businesses?
The study did not mention that out of small businesses. What it did see was a suppression of workers' wages, a slowing of people entering apprenticeship programs, and a big boost in pay for CEOs. So, hey, that's some people like that. Mostly CEOs, but.
If there's not anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Well, I thought that was a good discussion. Quinn's rules.